let's do this, folks. Let's come back to our presentation. I'm going to paste this in the chat box because, again, I know I'm not going to have time to go through all of it. But remember, the organization that I work for is all about empowering people with these mapping tools. So our threefold goals are education, sustainability, and science. And that's why we do what we do and why we want to give these tools to people so they can make their own. And the platform that I'm using here is called arcgis.com. So I'm going to give you a place where you can go to get a free account so you can make story maps, you can make maps, and that's right here. Now, don't let this developer page scare you off. You don't have to be a developer, in other words, a coder that knows about JavaScript and Python, which actually makes all these maps work in the first place. You don't have to be a coder. If you just want to make a story map or a ArcGIS Online map, you've got a spreadsheet of data and you want to kind of play around with this stuff. Hey, the cool places I went to in my lifetime or last summer, or places I want to go, or just places I'm interested in. If you want to make your own maps, this would be a place to start. Get a free account here. Now, I'm already signed in, so I'm going to sign out. And I'm going to show you what this page looks like when you go to the developer page. And it looks like this. It's going to say start building for free. Oh, yeah, I want to do that. And it's going to say, hey, okay, sign up for a free ArcGIS developer account. And we're Esri, the organization I work for, we're not Google. Google does some good things too, but we're not an advertising company. We're just mapping geeks. So in other words, we're not going to say, hey, Darlene, I see you're in Denver. There's a cool restaurant down the street and they've got a 2-for-1 deal. We don't do that. We don't, spread your name around. We don't even know who has an account in here. So anyway, this is one way for you to start making these tools. And now for those of you that are involved with education, which I know there's a few of you, all these tools, what we want to do is get them into the hands of students and faculty for free. So that has been a goal since 1992 on our education team. So if you're at all in touch, you've got kids in a school, you've got acquaintances that are teachers, tell them, hey, these mapping tools, you can teach science, social studies, computer science, math, history with these tools. Okay, so more about that later, but that's one of the things I wanted to share with you all. A couple of other web mapping tools I want you to think about, but again, kind of stepping back for a moment, one of the things that really drives me forward is walkable neighborhoods. I promised I'd talk about this about 2 minutes ago, and I'm going to show you an example of the connection between story maps, web GIS maps, field tools, and a survey. Okay, and I have lots of things that I'm passionate about, as I know all of you inquisitive ALL people are passionate about many things. And one of the things I'm passionate about is walkable neighborhoods. So when I was on work travel in the not too distant past, before we kind of were brought into the office, I'd always make it a point wherever I traveled, school campus, university, conference site, whatever, to go walking. And, sometimes I'd have to wake up super early before I had to go to work, et cetera, but I'd always make it a point. And so I'm very passionate about walkable neighborhoods and biking as well, but let's just focus on walkability here. So in this story maps, there's another story map. We looked at the hot number story map, the Titanic story map. Here is my story map on walkable neighborhoods. So in this case, I was up in South Dakota for the South Dakota GIS, Geographic Information Systems Conference, and I was in Mitchell. How many of you have been to Mitchell and you know what is that structure in the background? Darlene, what's that structure with the dome in the background in Mitchell?
It's the Corn Palace.
The Corn Palace. I highly recommend. They decorate the outside in different corn cob designs with different kernels showing different pattern every year. It's a lot of labor, but it's an amazing place. And there were a lot of corn palaces around the upper Midwest at one point, and this is one of the few that remains. Anyway, but people first to showcase, what they were doing in agriculture, with livestock and crops and provide a fun place for the community to meet. Anyway, it's a fascinating place. So here is my photograph of downtown Mitchell. Would you consider this to be walkable or not? Someone put it in the chat box. Walkable, not walkable, somewhere in between. Okay, there's a sidewalk here. There's some cars, but there's not a lot of traffic. This is Mitchell, South Dakota on a summer's evening. And There's a ramp. So if I was in a wheelchair, for example, or on a skateboard or something like that, I could get up and down the sidewalk. So that's good. The sidewalk is in fairly good condition. So yeah, I'd kind of put it toward the higher end of the walkable, maybe not the most walkable place ever, but pretty walkable. And in my story map, I also have a few sentences about what is walkability? Why do communities and businesses and others care about walkable neighborhoods? Why has there been a sort of a return to let's make our neighborhoods more walkable after sort of, decades of sort of ignoring that, thinking, oh, everybody's going to be in a car. Nobody's going to want to walk anymore, right? Sort of 60s, 70s, and nothing against ELO and the Bee Gees, but 1960s and 1970s. Anyway, the point is I've got this in a story map. In the story map, I have a big red button. And in the button, I've got a survey. And this touches on our crowdsourcing citizen science, one of those hexagons that I was showing earlier. My survey, and you've all either been surveyed, right? In the not too distant past, you barely get off the plane. Hey, how was your flight? You get the survey from, United Airlines or somebody. Hey, I just got off the plane. I'm not ready to take a survey yet. So you're kind of over surveyed, aren't you, these days? Anyway, here is and you may have even created a survey like through SurveyMonkey or Google Forms. I mean, there's lots of ways to create surveys, which is part of the reason why people are being over surveyed nowadays. It's easy to create these surveys. But here is a special kind of survey. It's called Survey 123. And this is part of this whole mapping geographic information systems environment. Here, I created the survey and I say pedestrian friendly or unfriendly. Okay, tick one or one of those. Rate the walkability, horrible to excellent. All right, tick all the choices, branches, snow, cracks in the sidewalk, or is there a dedicated sidewalk? It's in good condition, or is there a lot of cross traffic? Give me some characteristics, and then germane to our discussion today, where is it? And then do you have a photograph? So in my story map, I've got that survey sitting in there. Okay, and then the results are displayed in real time on this web map, which is the same exact platform that we've been using for the past 2 days. So in here, I've got two symbols. Green for the person filling out the survey deems that it's friendly. The hollow, unfriendly. So I've got this sort of either or type of map. Okay, and as you probably would expect based on our discussion in the past, that every one of these points has a database behind it. It has records behind it that gives the map its intelligence. In other words, these maps are not just a bunch of points, lines, and polygons floating out in cyberspace. So in this case, here's a point at Canberra in Australia. Good on you, mate. She'll be right. Right. So here I've got Canberra, and I've got some data in there that, in this case, I actually filled out my own survey. And it says no path or sidewalk, but on the other hand, it's good for pedestrians. And oh, it's good for kangaroos too. Why is that? Well, because on this particular walk, I was joined by these tails on these things, on the adults. They're like those noodles at swimming pools. You know what I mean? Those orange and purple noodles that you see people using. They're like this big around. Fortunately, they're very friendly. They're kind of timid, so they kind of backed away from me, but close enough where I could get a somewhat blurry shot. Anyway, the point is, you've got this map tied to a survey, and it's all wrapped up into this story map. So here is the final piece of my story map, and it's a dashboard. It's a dashboard with interactivity on it. So in this case, I say, hey, I want a live feed from my survey. I want to have a chart over here, a graph over here, a web map over here, a gauge. Right now, there are 511 survey points that have come into my survey that I and others have collected. This is an open survey. So you could actually collect data into it right now or right after this class ends, and I'd see your points on the map. Cool. So why is it cool? Because people are collecting data on a whole wide variety of things, and scientists and planners and others can use that to make their communities, again, better, healthier, more sustainable, et cetera. So think about the Forest Service. They don't have enough staff to go and survey all the pine beetle infested, sadly, infested trees. They rely on citizens to actually, oh, this stand over here is now, looks like it's in bad shape. Okay, I was up in Frisco, Colorado about a month ago and hiked on a couple of trails, and they had done some thinning of those mountainsides in the hopes that by thinning those trees out, those beetles will croak, right? That they won't spread. So some of that data comes in from citizens like me hiking those trails saying, this isn't so good now this year. It was better last year, etc. Absolutely. So here is a dashboard. This dashboard, as you can see, roughly 3/4 of the points that people have deemed or have recorded in the survey are deemed pedestrian friendly, and about 1/4 are unfriendly. Here are some characteristics, right? Not ideal for pedestrians, excellent for pedestrians. Here's a little legend that I put in the dashboard. And just like the dashboard in your car, you get a lot of information in a short amount of space. And another nice thing, if you get your own account and you want to actually make one of these, they're very configurable. In other words, no coding required. And you're just saying, I want a graph over here. So drag the graph tool over to this part of the screen. Drag the map over to this part of the screen. Drag the gauge down to this part of the screen. And over here, I want a photograph. So they're very approachable and doable. Another thing that I wanted to point out here is that this graph, along with this dashboard, along with the web map, along with the survey, and the whole story map that wraps all other 3 things into one story map that tells you a story about walkability, took me about 1 afternoon. So 1 hour, basically 1 class period for each one of these components. 1 class period for the dashboard, 1 for the story map, 1 for the survey, and 1 for the web map itself. So we're not talking days, weeks, months to create these things. And another thing, in closing, that this dashboard that you saw a moment ago is the same tool that the JHU, Johns Hopkins University Department of Health and Geography used to create the COVID dashboard. That's the same tool. It's just that their dashboard, which again uses the same tools, gets feeds from CDC, right, WHO, local health authorities, et cetera. So it's got a lot of feeds coming into it, but it's the same technology. It's the same tool. Now my dashboard, sure, it gets real feeds, but really there's only a few survey points that come in here daily, as you can see here. I've only got 511 rather than the sad, grim details of all the COVID cases that they're tracking in the COVID dashboard. And the COVID dashboard is, for good reason, the most popular dashboard, and maybe one might argue the most important dashboard that's ever been created, because people depend on it to make decisions. Anyway, the point is, you've got access, and those of you that are in education, your students have access to these same tools. I wish I could get excited about this. Okay, we better move on, because a couple of other really intriguing tools are still on our schedule to go over. One of them is a component of geotechnologies that we haven't done much with yet because we just haven't had time yet, but now it's time to get into it.